Michael sat alone in the living room, staring at the long, stretched shadows dancing across the walls. The world outside had begun to settle into night, but inside his home, time felt frozen, painfully still. Just a few hours earlier his wife, Claire, had left. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She didn't even look back. She simply zipped up her suitcase, quietly, precisely, and walked out the front door, leaving behind a silence heavier than any argument they had ever had. He tried replaying her last words in his mind, but everything felt blurry, distant, like a dream already fading. The only sound he could remember clearly was the metallic hum of the zipper on her bag and the soft, rhythmical tapping of her footsteps as they drifted farther and farther away from him. Now the house didn't feel like a home. It felt wrong, incomplete. Michael looked around at the room they once filled with laughter and late-night conversations. The photos lining the mantel showed smiling faces, sunlit vacations, birthday candles, and moments frozen in joy. But tonight, even the smiles in those photographs felt like ghosts of a life he no longer recognized. He picked up one picture carefully, almost tenderly. Claire's bright smile stared back at him, full of warmth, full of promise, and Michael found himself tracing her face with his thumb. He wondered quietly, painfully, when did this smile stop being for me? When had she stopped seeing him? He thought about the little signs he had brushed aside. The dinners where she barely spoke, the nights she stayed late at work without explanation, the way she had started looking past him instead of at him. The signs were there, large, painful, obvious. Yet he ignored them, convincing himself that love could hold everything together if he just tried hard enough. But now the truth sat in front of him, silent, cold, undeniable. He was alone. Trying to distract himself, Michael walked into the kitchen, but there, sitting on the counter, were two untouched mugs of coffee. One was his. The other he had made for her that morning, hoping a warm gesture might soften whatever distance had grown between them. But Claire hadn't even touched it. Something inside him cracked as he poured both cups down the sink. The dark liquid swirled and disappeared down the drain, like the last remnants of their marriage dissolving into nothing. The sound of the running water only made the house feel emptier. Back in the living room, he lowered himself onto the couch. His breathing felt uneven, heavy. He wanted to call someone, a friend, a sibling, anyone who could tell him this wasn't the end. But his hands refused to move. He wasn't sure who would understand. He wasn't even sure he understood what had happened. Then suddenly, the doorbell rang. Michael froze. For a brief, foolish moment, his heart leaped. He imagined Claire standing there, suitcase still in hand, ready to take it all back. But he quickly shook the thought away. Claire wasn't the type of person who left in a storm only to return minutes later. He stood and opened the door slowly. Standing outside was Evelyn, Claire's mother. Her presence caught him completely off guard. She looked calm, wearing a simple cardigan, holding a small bag. But her eyes held something deeper. A quiet strength. A sadness. A question. "Michael," she said softly, her voice warm, almost comforting. "May I come in?" He stepped aside, confused. He had expected judgment, anger, maybe even blame. After all, her daughter had walked out. Wouldn't any mother want someone to hold responsible? But Evelyn's expression wasn't sharp or accusing. It was gentle. They sat in the living room. The same room that felt unbearably silent moments ago. Now, with Evelyn sitting across from him, the weight in the air felt different, not lighter, but bearable. Michael opened his mouth, searching for words. All he managed was a broken, "She's gone." "I know," Evelyn replied softly. "She called me before she left." The words hit him like a punch. "So, you know she doesn't want this anymore," he whispered. Evelyn paused, choosing her words with the care of someone holding a delicate, fragile truth. "Sometimes people leave," she said quietly. "Not because they don't care, but because they don't know how to stay." Her words startled him. Not because they were comforting, but because they were kind. He wasn't prepared for kindness tonight. For the first time since Claire walked out, the silence between them didn't feel like a punishment. Evelyn's presence softened the edges of the room. She didn't accuse him. She didn't interrogate him. She didn't pull apart the wounds already bleeding inside him. She simply sat with him. A small act, but to Michael, it felt like the first breath after nearly drowning. Still, One question tugged at him, refusing to let go. Why had she come here tonight? Why now? Why immediately after her daughter left? He had no idea that tonight was only the beginning of a story far more complicated and far more unexpected than anything he had imagined. Evelyn didn't rush to speak. She didn't fill the air with questions or assumptions. Instead, she sat across from Michael with calm, patient eyes. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, her posture composed, as though she understood that sometimes silence heals more than words ever could. Michael, however, felt anything but calm. His fingers tapped nervously against his knee. His eyes darted between the carpet, the coffee table, the blank space on the wall where Claire's painting used to hang. He wanted to say something, anything, that explained how lost he felt. But every attempt crumbled before it reached his lips. Finally, Evelyn ended the silence. Michael, she said softly, I didn't come here to talk about blame. I came because I know you're hurting, and I didn't want you to face this night alone. Her words landed deep, deeper than she probably intended. Michael had been bracing himself for anger, for a barrage of accusations about how he failed Claire, how he let their marriage crumble. Instead, he was met with understanding, gentle, unexpected understanding. He lifted his eyes, searching her face for traces of judgment. But there was none. Only sincerity. I loved Claire, Michael said suddenly, his voice cracking. The words spilled out before he could stop them. I did everything I knew how to do. Maybe it wasn't enough. Maybe I wasn't enough. His hands shook slightly as he leaned forward, burying his face in them. His shoulders trembled, not with loud sobs, but with the kind of silent grief that leaves deeper wounds. Don't say that, Evelyn whispered, leaning slightly closer. You gave her love, stability, a home. You were there for her. Sometimes people drift away, not because the other person wasn't enough, but because they themselves are searching for something else. Her voice was firm but gentle, like someone guiding a wounded child through a storm. Michael took a shaky breath. Then why does it feel like I've lost everything? Because, she said softly, you invested your whole heart. And when someone gives that much, the absence feels unbearable. Her words wrapped around him like a warm, fragile blanket. But don't let this moment convince you that you're less, she continued. You're still the man who loved honestly, and that matters. Something shifted inside him. Not peace, not healing, just a small, quiet awareness that he wasn't completely shattered, not yet. The hours began to move more quickly as Michael opened up. He told her everything he had avoided admitting even to himself. He spoke about the growing distance in his marriage, the way Claire came home later and later, the conversations that slowly disappeared, the quiet emotional withdrawal, the feeling of loving someone who had already drifted far away. He confessed the truth he feared most, that he had pretended everything was fine because he didn't want to face the possibility that love wasn't always enough to keep someone by your side. Evelyn listened without interrupting, without judgment. She didn't defend Claire. She didn't criticize Michael. She simply listened, with empathy so genuine it felt like a lifeline. At one point, Michael sighed and said, I don't know why I'm telling you all this. You're her mother. You should hate me. Evelyn shook her head slowly, her expression softening even further. Hate doesn't solve anything, she said quietly. And I don't hate you, Michael. I can see your pain. And I know your heart. You were good to Claire. You deserve someone to remind you of that, even if she couldn't. Her words were gentle, but they cut through the fog in his mind like sunlight through storm clouds. For the first time since Claire walked out, Michael felt truly seen. Not as a failed husband, not as someone left behind, but as a human being trying his best. He looked at Evelyn differently now, not as Claire's mother, but as someone who understood him in a way Claire hadn't, not anymore. Later, Evelyn stood up and walked into the kitchen. She moved with quiet familiarity, as though she had been in this house 100 times before. She found cups, boiled water, and prepared tea, not asking where anything was. When she returned, she handed him a steaming mug. Michael wrapped his hands around it, letting the warmth seep into him. It wasn't just the tea that calmed him, it was the gesture. Soft, simple, human. Michael, she said softly, I know this hurts more than words can describe, But don't let the hurt blind you to what you still are. You're strong. You're kind. And you deserve peace. Michael looked at her as she spoke. He noticed the gentle light in her eyes, the steady presence she carried, the effortless warmth that filled the room in a way Claire hadn't been able to in months. For a brief moment, he wondered if Claire had inherited her mother's warmth, but somewhere along the way had lost the ability to share it. The night deepened around them, shadows stretching, silence settling softer now. Neither of them seemed eager to end the conversation. The more they talked, the more Michael felt like he was being guided out of a storm he had been trapped in for far too long. Evelyn didn't erase the pain, but she gave him room to breathe again. He spoke quietly, almost in disbelief. It feels easier talking to you than it did with Claire these last months. Evelyn didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached out gently and placed her hand over his. Just for a moment. A small, soft touch, but enough to remind him. He wasn't invisible. He wasn't abandoned. He wasn't unloved. Her hand pulled away, but the warmth stayed long after. Michael didn't know what the moment meant. Maybe she didn't either. But in that fragile instant, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Even before Claire left. Hope. As the clock neared midnight, Evelyn stood up, gathering her small bag. I should let you rest, she said quietly. But remember, Michael, you don't have to go through this alone. I'll check in on you. Her voice held a promise, subtle, but sincere. Michael rose to walk her to the door. His throat tightened with gratitude he didn't know how to express. And as she stepped outside into the cool night air, something inside Michael shifted again. The story was far from over.